The topic is future-proofing policy. A lot of it stems from the fact that the concept of advertising, as everyone before us has told us, has changed dramatically. So there probably is also a requirement to future-proof advertising, and that's what I felt because recently someone reached out to me on LinkedIn asking me if I wanted to be an influencer for their product. And I was, I first thought it was spam, but then I realized it was not. My first instinctive reaction was to try and reach out to Manisha and see if, but then I said, anybody who needs me to advertise their product probably is not, going down anyway, so I might as well just reject it and just move on, and that's what I did. But, jokes apart, clearly the concept of advertising as people, at least from my generation, understood it has completely changed. And therefore, the whole context in which we are discussing this today, the way brands look at advertising, the concept of influencers, de-influencers, and so many other different things have made the concept very, very fuzzy for a lot of us. What is advertising? And therefore, I'm sure for policymakers, for organizations like Shelly's and Google, it is so much more difficult to even try and put the boundaries that are required to be able to future-proof advertising and future-proof policy in the context of a digital world. And that is the context in which we are having our discussion today. We have, of course, industry stalwarts, people who are facing these challenges on a daily basis. And we thought we will have a discussion around a few different aspects. And we'll start with, navigating cross-border regulations, which is something that most global organizations are having to face. Multiple privacy laws, multiple SROs, all kinds of different local nuances, cultural nuances, all of which need to play out. And I'm sure Shelly faces this more than many others from an Indian regulation perspective. So I wanted to start with you, Shelly. How challenging is it advertising to advertise across these different jurisdictions with the different challenges, with the different SROs? And what are the key principles and approaches that you and your organization and the larger advertising community look at to be able to manage this whole situation?
Sure. So thank you for that question. So I think in a room full of regulators, let me just share the perspective from an advertiser. Now my challenge has gone considerably low because, being in the alco-bev space, you are in a media dark environment. So, the job as far as a lawyer is concerned from that perspective has come down considerably. But I've worked for Unilever, so I can share from that perspective. Of course, it's extremely challenging when you have to, digital media or advertisements really have no geographical boundaries, right? And when they can be viewed across the world, it is going to be extremely challenging navigating different legal frameworks and requirements, different enforcement practices, or the rigor around them, right? I was so excited when I heard earlier about a harmonized system. And actually, that's something which I would also like to propagate and for us to consider. And we have some wonderful examples. If you look at it, the UNCITRAL, right, which has, these models around commercial arbitration, okay, or examples around e-commerce. Why can't we have one of those, and countries or organizations that are signatories could then avail of those sort of standards which are consistent? Because what an advertiser needs is consistency and predictability, and that's what will come from that. Apart from that, WTO has trade agreements, right? And those are also some of the great examples of similar systems or harmonized, systems and standards, right? From an advertiser's perspective, while we are still far from any harmonized systems, what we could do is, and what I have been doing, is to have a very strong internal framework in place, right? A compliance framework that constantly monitors and looks at what the marketeers, or sort of keeping those marketeers in check. The other thing, what we also try to do is keep very close watch or work very closely with regulators, whether it's a self-regulator like ASCI or other regulators, or sectoral regulators for that matter, to really have a sharp eye on how the law is evolving. And that also helps you put in systems and processes internally within the organization to make sure that the company really doesn't cross the line. That's all that I have.
Sure. So, Guy, taking up from what Shelly's talked about, so there are these UNCITRAL frameworks which work across multiple industries. What is a self-regulatory body, the largest self-regulatory body like ICAS, doing in this regard to make advertising seamless across digital platforms for organizations which are global?
It's a very good question, and thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here. I mean, the short answer is ICAS is doing a lot, and one of the kind of fundamental purposes of ICAS is to help ad standards bodies around the world, including ASCI here in India, the ASA in the UK, and many others represented here today in the audience. What we're trying to do is share best practice, share our different approaches, learn from each other. But we also want consistency wherever consistency is sensible. We can't get away from the fact that we are ad self-regulatory bodies in countries that sometimes have their own laws that touch on the work that we do, and the laws aren't all consistent. And because ad self-regulation is a complement to the law, a really important complement to the law that does a lot of good for the public and for responsible businesses and for society, but a complement nonetheless. We have to operate within our own local legal context, and that can be a bit of a constraint towards getting the perfect consistency that would be ideal in some of these areas. The other thing we have to take into account, and this is really important, is different cultural norms in countries, which again, we ad self-regulatory bodies in our countries, we've got to respond to that, because we've got to be sensitive to what really matters in our countries, what's accepted, what's taboo. And again, there's some inconsistency, there's invariably inconsistency in those areas too, and they sometimes touch on our worlds. But all of us are policing. All of us are administering codes that have been written by our industries that contain a lot of principles-based rules that, at the standards level at least, are consistent. Where we can work hard to deliver more consistency is in how we apply those rules in real life. How do we interpret those rules? All of us have got rules that say ads can't be misleading or be likely to mislead, or words to that effect, right? They're all kind of serving the same purpose. They're principles based. If there's a new media channel or new advertising technique, we don't need to change the rule because the rule can still apply to that. So it's kind of future proof in that sense. What can we do to make sure that we're applying that in our different countries in a consistent way when it's sensible to do that? One of the projects that ICAS is working on at the moment, and I think we're going to deliver on this project in a month or so, are some high-level principles around influencer advertising and disclosure. And this work was commissioned by the World Federation of Advertisers, so it touches on what you were talking about earlier around influencers and the importance of influencers in the Indian market and around the world. How can we set out these high-level principles that can act as a North Star to drive more consistency among ad self-regulatory bodies around the world for the betterment of society, for the better protection of the public, for more certainty for brands?
Sure. So that's the other aspect of what Shelly talked about is the digitization of advertisement, making it so much more difficult to control. So Google as a platform is probably the most universal platform being used by all the different forms of advertisements and advertisers who are present in the digital world. What does Google see its role as in the context of ICAS? I know that you do a lot of work with ICAS, with individual advertising bodies. What is your role, or how does Google see its role in self-regulation or driving the future of how the policies are driven?
Thank you, and thanks for having me here. It's fantastic to be in Mumbai. I don't think we have a unique role, but Google currently feels quite unique because we are the only platform that is as engaged as we are in the network globally. We've been supporting self-regulation for probably over 10 years, starting off in certain areas of Europe and then expanding, and then now, of course, with our ICAS partnership, and I know we've been doing more locally in APAC and in other regions. I think we do it because we think advertising regulators play an absolute pivotal role in securing the future of the advertising industry in the markets in which we operate in, and that that's not new news to everyone in this room. I think you wouldn't be here if you didn't believe that. But I think that for a long time, the ad regulator community relied too heavily on the traditional media players that understand their role as for want of a better term, as a responsible citizen, and then what we've seen is an explosion in new advertising businesses over the last 20 years, often digital native, both brands and agencies, and of course, ad tech intermediaries, platforms. And that value is not well understood. And even within Google, we are huge supporters, but there are parts of Google that don't quite understand the value add of national ad regulators. So part of what we want to do, because we are relatively unique in having a team that focuses on these challenges and these opportunities, we want to help ICAS and advertising regulators across the world to evolve and to future-proof and to take their message to the wider ecosystem. And this is not selfless. This is absolutely about our business. We can only succeed if consumers trust advertising, and we're only as good as the worst player in the ecosystem. And we see this time and again in perceptions of digital advertising in governments around the world, that there is perception in certain places that this is bandit country, that there is a lack of regulation, that anything goes. And in most instances, in most of our markets, that's simply not true. But it's not well understood. And those advertising businesses that are benefiting from that are often not as engaged as they need to be. So our role, coming back to the original question, if we see ourselves, as well as just playing our role like every other ads business around the table, is to help try to have that different conversation with those digital native businesses and to help you and the community project your message.
And I can stay with you for a minute, Michael. So we're talking about future-proofing policy, which also means that it's very important for us to know which way is technology headed. So 10 years ago, most of us did not even think of the concept of influencer as being a key aspect of what the regulators need to regulate today. How does Google view that role, and what kind of a role do you play? And then I'll come to the rest of you to understand, how are you looking at technology? How closely are you keeping an eye on digital technology? Because what we are experiencing now will probably be completely obsolete in 2.5 years. So how do you plan for that, and how do you future-proof policy from that perspective? What's the role that you play in that?
I mean, I think the role we play, it was articulated in the introduction. First, I'm not going to water down our role, but dialogue. I think the issue is not specifically about influence. It's about the fact that this is what was previously well regarded as traditional advertising is no longer relevant. It is way broader and more complex and more messy than it ever used to be. And influencers are one element of that. And we don't know what the future is gonna hold in that space, but we can absolutely be sure that there will be more of these messy situations where you have new types of advertising and commercial communication that emerge, and that as an ecosystem we have to adapt. So, our role is, first of all, to keep our own platforms safe as best we can. And second of all, to try and help educate people who use our platforms on the role that they have in that space. So specifically in the instance of influencers, we put an awful lot of effort into helping educate influencers on the rules that apply, how they apply, and what they need to do that, and enabling those conversations with ad regulators around the world. But it is really hard. Often these individuals, these companies, these organizations, they don't have the same relationships with us as a platform as a traditional advertiser does. We don't have the same influence over their approach as we do over a traditional advertiser. We don't have the same monetary agreement with these influencers as we do with traditional advertisers. So we have to behave differently. And so often it's about education, and it's about enabling a conversation with SROs.
And Guy, from your perspective, so we're talking influencers, but now we have artificial influences, right? The whole concept of AI and the role that the AI is playing in driving behavior, in trying to create ideas about what is right, what is wrong, what you should buy, what you should choose. How do you self-regulate something which is not even in the real world? What is the entire community of SROs doing about trying to regulate artificial influencers?
I think the issue of AI and how it's changing our world is much bigger than virtual influencers, right? But you make a good point about how it can be deployed in that way. And one of the things that I think is going to be important for ad standards bodies around the world to do is to make sure that virtual influencers are, it's clear to people who are following them or seeing their posts or videos that the entity that they're dealing with is virtual and maybe AI powered and isn't a real person. I think that's going to be important,
Right?
Because I think and the reason why I think it's important is because it affects how critically we appraise the content, how on our guard we are when we consume that the content that's been put out by virtual influencers versus real human influencers. How on guard are we? What are our expectations? I mean, if you think about it, with human influencers, we probably have a subconscious, if not conscious, perspective that they've got something to lose as a human being. They've got something to lose if they do something really bad. But maybe that doesn't apply to an AI influencer, right? So, and I think that's an explanation of why it matters for people to know if that's the case. The issue of AI more broadly is really interesting. We're not regulating AI. No ad standards body is going to be regulating AI, but we may well be regulating ads that have been created by AI, and that raises interesting questions about what are the sort of rules and standards that we need. Well, basically, it's the same standards that we've already got. And one of the important things that we need to do in meeting the challenge of the future is to continue to create and maintain standards that are principles based and are kind of technology and future proof. How we apply them might change depending on changes in society and changes in technology and new techniques and new approaches, but the underlying principles themselves stay the same. So when it comes to ads that have been created using AI, for example, and they are already prevalent and they're only going to become more prevalent, they're probably going to be ubiquitous before too long. I think what we need to be thinking about, I think what really matters is, has any mischief resulted from the use of AI in that ad, right? The mere fact that AI has been used to make that ad, that may not be a big deal,
enough,
right?
Yes.
We know that in most cases, we consumers, I'm thinking of us as consumers, right? Consumers of ads. We know that in most cases, ads do not depict reality, right? Most ads feature actors, not real people, but we don't expect that to be disclaimed to us in the ad with a label telling us that the ad features actors. Very often ads are fantastical. They're not depicting real messy life. They're fantastical, and we know that. That's not necessarily, that might be a misleading ad, but most of them are not misleading ads, and we know it. Mm-hmm. And they might have been created using CGI or other techniques. And again, we don't expect that to be labeled in ads. So we need to be quite outcome focused when we apply our ad standard self-regulatory minds to this issue of the use of AI in the creation of content in ads, and indeed to the targeting of ads, the two things that we ad self-regulatory bodies really care about. We need to, just thinking about technology more broadly, we need to work with platforms and other businesses that operate in the digital space to help us to figure out how we do this, because they've got to be partners with us. And we've got to learn from each other, and we're going to need their help as well. We're going to need their help within, monitoring compliance and enforcement, taking down bad ads when they appear, so that we can continue to protect people from bad ads. And we need to use technology ourselves. And lots of us ad standards bodies are already doing that. We're already, either beginning that journey or we're quite far down the road. We've got an AI-based system that we use in the UK called our Active Ad Monitoring System, and we are capturing and scanning 30 million online ads a year and running them through machine learning models and Gen AI models to find the interesting ads. And when you've got something like the online world that is just turbocharged the ability of businesses and sole traders and small businesses and micro businesses to advertise, which is a good thing for our economies.
Of course.
You have to use that sort of technology to keep an eye on what's going on. Otherwise, how do we know where the problems are that are affecting people and harming people and causing them to distrust advertising?
So, Shelly, as an advertiser, in this decentralized world of advertising, how are you, ensuring that your business, the larger community of advertisers, are not getting, pulled down by regulation yet and being able to use technology to their advantage without necessarily facing the side effects of, virtual influencers and the incorrect messaging that they might lead up to. So how are you guiding your businesses in being able to do that?
Sure. So I think what he referred to, something similar, we can try to emulate internally,
Right.
right? So as I said earlier, having like set of processes and standards and internal monitoring and auditing. Also working very closely with marketeers, right? In terms of educating them as to what are the potential pitfalls if they were to tread the line. I also wanted to make a point on a combination of self-regulation and legislative regulation as well, and especially when it comes to advertisements with, with vulnerable demographies that those are being targeted, or advertisements around health, education, finance, food, etc. Right? For those, I think there has to be a combination of both of these, yeah, because of what is at stake.
Right.
And so there is a need for some sort of an enhancement of, let's say, disclosure requirements. Let's say, what is the identity of the advertiser? Apart from, the claims that are being made or the ads that are being put out, to make sure that there is enough substantiation, like there is scientific substantiation. Also, there is probably a need of cost-based penalties. So basically, the benefit that an advertisement derives. So commensurate with that, some sort of a penalization, and there are examples around the world for that, and some of it that we are already doing it within the country. But it's a combination, as we said. It has to be the whole ecosystem that has to enable that. The fundamental principles around transparency, truthfulness, and at the heart of it all, consumer protection,
Right.
have to be maintained.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think, and we can come to Michael first and then move to you, Guy. The whole context of SROs is to try and ensure that governments stay away from regulating advertising too much. But so I totally get your point that there has to be a certain amount of regulatory, control that is imposed by individual governments. But for the concept of SRO to thrive and survive, there has to be some understanding about how far does the government go and where do they stop and where do the SROs come in and play the actual role of the regulator. So in that context, Michael, you are cross-border, you are across all jurisdictions. What do you see as the role of the SRO in the future? What do they need to do to ensure that their space is not deeply encroached into, probably the wrong terminology, by the individual governments, because that makes the role of, organizations who are advertising globally so much more difficult?
This is a great question for me. I love talking about this, so I'll try to be. In principle, the role of SROs is to keep our industry responsible. And the reason that we fund SROs is because fundamentally, as an industry, we believe self-regulation is more flexible, more understanding with the commercial challenges than statutory regulation. That is, in my layman's hat on, that is the case. That's why we do it. That case is not well understood. So I'm going back to my initial point. I have conversations with some people in digital who question whether it's just better to have statutory regulation. Not because SROs are doing a bad job, just because they don't understand the case and they don't understand the value. And I think that, so my kind of tub-thumping ask is like, we can't just assume that everyone agrees with that case and gets it. And I think particularly in the past 10 to 15 years with the explosion of digital advertising, I think, and this isn't a criticism of SROs, it is something that the entire industry has been grappling with, which is adapting to that change rapidly. Governments have been doing it, some better than others, around the world. And at the risk of sounding like I'm kind of over complimenting Guy because he sat next to me, the work that the ASA in the UK has done, and it won the European Award this year for the best innovation, I think, which is this. The switch to using AI and machine learning to help regulate is going to be key. And Guy, I'm going to put you on the spot on your figures because I remember it from the award ceremony. Just remind me and the audience, like the shift in the number of ads that you are now dealing with because of your machine learning. It's gone from something. It's what we said. It's like so many million now, and a few years ago it was. What was that figure?
So when we launched the system in 2022, Q4 2022, we scanned 40,000 ads in that quarter, and then 2023 was 3 million ads. Last year was 28 million ads. We're running at about 3.5 million a month, I think, and we're going to ramp it up. We want to get to 50 million ads by the end of the year, and then it'll probably tail off because we'll have kind of good enough visibility.
So just
basically.
to understand, it's not that the number of ads have increased, it's just your ability to monitor ads.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and we're talking about ads of all different types. So we're talking about paid, open internet paid ads. We're talking about ads on platforms that we can access through ad libraries. We've got Google has very kindly given us access to a UK ad library of ads that we can get ads from. We've got a deal with a third-party provider that provides us with the open internet ads. We capture influencer ads. We use tools of our own to capture advertising claims on their own websites and social media space. So it's a whole different hodgepodge of different methods and approaches and agreements that hoovers up the online ads of all different types. And then our data science team that we've been investing in for the last 4 years, they build the machine learning and the Gen AI models that make sense of those, that filter them and find the interesting stuff and the likely dodgy stuff. And then there's an internal portal that our human beings can access, and they can look through the latest reports. And we're in control. We're in control of what, if anything, we do with that information. We're not kind of overloaded by it because we're in control of what we do with it. And the challenge for us in running the system is not the technology in the middle. The building the models that make sense of this information and provide accurate enough insights as to which ones are likely breaking the rules, which ones are particularly interesting because we want to find out more about what's happening in a sector, for example. That's kind of easy. The challenge for us at the moment is we haven't got enough people to act on the insights that we're getting from this system. It's a kind of, it's just a sort of logistical, operational challenge that we will work out. But we can talk to other regulators in the UK and government and politicians and the Bank of England and about what we're doing. And I promise you, they are all falling off their chairs at what we have built. And it's like little old us, because we do not, like some statutory regulators in the UK, we do not have 90 people in our data science department. We're not investing millions in this. We really aren't. We launched this system with a team of 3. And any SRO can do this with a bit of money, or can start doing this. They can start down this road with a bit of money and with a good AI consultancy. The value here is not in the tech. The value is in how you think about it, how you piece together open source tech that you can get and make it work for you to deliver in the areas that matter to you in your country.
So can I just come back just to finish off that? Because I think Guy's just sold it for me. But a few years ago, we were having conversations where, and I can't remember Dip or Kat in the audience, maybe remind me, but how many billion ads Google removes proactively from our own systems every year? Was 5.5 billion ads. So when we're talking to governments, or we're talking to brands, or we're talking to our peers about that, and we publish it every year, and then you have an SRO that talks about how many thousand ads they've dealt with, the questions are asked about the effectiveness of SROs in regulating digital long term. And I think what we've seen in the past few years, which we're really excited about, and of course we heard about Guy, but I know there are other instances of really interesting and impressive innovation going on in SROs around the world using machine learning, AI, and new technologies, is this shift. And it's such a fundamentally important shift if we're to prove to governments, to prove to consumers, and to prove to the wider industry that this is the way that we should be regulating ourselves. This is the way that we keep our systems safe and our consumers safe. So I think that's just.
So if I can just come back to you for a moment, Guy, on the entire technology that you've built, has that in any way helped you modify the regulatory policy around advertising? So since we are talking about future-proofing policy, has that in any way influenced the policy that is now driving advertising?
It does. It does influence it because it tells us what's going on in areas that we think are high priorities for us to be acting. You know, we know from a bunch of different intelligence, complaints that we receive from the public, but lots of other forms of intelligence too. We know the areas we're interested in and where we think there's a problem that we need to tackle. And by the way, these areas do not normally involve the kind of P&Gs and Unilevers and Diageos and so on of the world, because they're responsible businesses that have got sophisticated compliance operations, and they rarely get it wrong. But there are areas that matter where there is harm going on in the UK where we feel we need to act. And one of the uses of our active ad monitoring system is to give us better visibility about what's going on in those areas. Is it true that there's a problem here? In detail, what does that problem look like? What does that mean? How do we respond to that? It probably won't be lots of formal investigations that respond to complaints that we've received. It's much more likely to be putting together guidance and forming partnerships with professional bodies or whatever in that space, and getting the message out that there need to be changes. And if necessary, following that up with perhaps an enforcement notice and some monitoring, using our active ad monitoring system to mop up those that haven't yet made changes to the ads. That's the way to tackle problems. Tackle problems in sectors that have become endemic. That's how to go from a situation where you've got an endemic problem of too low compliance with our codes to one where compliance has reached an acceptable level. You're never going to get to 100%, of course, but where you've changed things and made a material positive difference. And that's what we need to be turbocharging. Us SROs, we need to be getting into that. And there's lots of SROs that are at the very least dipping their toes. There are some that are running really good projects in this area. But Michael's right. This is a big part of the future for us.
And may I ask a question? So I wanted to ask you if there are any interventions that we are doing globally which could set as best practices or standards in terms of enhancing the enforcement, because self-regulation at the end of the day, it has its limitations.
Yeah, in terms of what sanctions, are you thinking of tougher sanctions? Because you mentioned fining earlier. Yeah, I mean, there's lots that we can do on that front, I think, but it'll probably be mostly in partnership. So in the UK, probably the same with ASCI, but I don't know enough about the way ASCI operates. Certainly lots of other ad standards bodies this applies. We do have agreements with statutory regulators and so on. And if we've got a particular problem with an advertiser or a bunch of advertisers in a sector, they're basically refusing to comply. They're refusing to play fair. The rest of the sector's happy, but are acting at a bit of a competitive disadvantage because there are 3 or 4 players that are refusing to do what's right. Then we can very often refer those businesses to a statutory backstop that does have the power to fine. The problem with having those powers ourselves as ad standards bodies is we're not statutory bodies. We do not derive authority from a piece of law that gives us the ability to implement, civil penalties like fines. We can't do that. And as soon as you go down that road, you start to drift away from self-regulation that enjoys the buy-in and the support and is funded by the industry, and you start to become a statutory regulator, and that kind of feels dangerous to us because we treasure the buy-in and the support that we get from the industry.
I think that's the spirit of the entire model of self-regulation. If the moment you are looking for penal consequences for every action, then the concept of self-regulation kind of gets diluted to that extent. But I had one question for you, and then I'll come back to you, Michael Guy. From this whole thing about technology that you've brought in, how much sharing of intelligence is happening using the technology between the various SROs? Because that would be extremely crucial if this movement is to catch on, especially since you brought in the context of small businesses, which is what I want to speak to Michael about. But before that, if you can just...
So we're not alone in this, because other ad standards bodies around the world are doing this too. It's not just us, right? They're developing technology that they're sharing. We have an approach of just of sharing it, basically of giving away the thinking and the ideas behind it. But this is not this is not a system that we think could really be licensed and we could make money out of, nor do we want to go that route, because the value in it is not in proprietary tech that we built. Anyone can build this tech. The value in is how we've thought it. The value is in how we've thought about it. How we've thought about it and how we've integrated it into our organisation and embedded it and got it to work for us. All of the individual pieces of it, anyone can do them, can get them, can use them. A lot of the tech is open source tech, right? It's how you piece it together and make it work for you. That's the value. And we will tell any ad standards body how we've done it, and they might be able to learn from us. Though, of course, it'll be different in their country. They'll have to adapt it, but we're in full share mode.
Excellent. Coming to you, Michael, from the point of view of Google and the small businesses, it's a very large community, and without saying that, I'm sure there are larger industry organizations which also fall foul of, advertising standards, but small businesses oftentimes, probably just because of the lack of awareness, are using different tools, technologies, which lead to misleading advertising happening more often in their case. What is the role that Google plays in trying to, propagate awareness amongst this group of, small businesses across the world?
It's hard. It's really hard. I think part of the challenge with small businesses is that they don't have representative groups. Or if they do, those representative groups don't really represent the full extent of small businesses. So you haven't really got a good pinch point for small businesses. We have relationships with small businesses, but a lot of the small businesses that advertise with Google are self-serve on our platforms. And it is a fantastic resource for small businesses. We do a lot on democratizing information. We try to enable small businesses to access information easily on the laws and regulations that they have to adhere to locally. We run webinars for small businesses in many of our markets. We have pretty intuitive tools to enable compliance, but it's not an easy nut to crack. I think there is opportunity to do more with SROs around the world on education of small businesses. That will be an interesting area to think about, and I think this is going to get harder. I think there's probably never been a better time to be a small business wanting to advertise. And I'm going to give you an example, and I've been wondering if I could leverage this one in. I need to caveat this heavily that I'm going well off piece for Google here. This is if you, at some point after the event's finished, if you go onto YouTube and Google the Pisanos, Pisanos, Porsche, as in the car Porsche, you will find an incredible ad that's really, really brilliantly created about an Italian family with really flexible necks. And it's a fantastic ad, and it's very well done. And there's a whole video of the ad, and then there is a video of how did we make this ad behind the scenes. The whole thing was done by one person using Google's DeepMind VO2 system on a computer. It's all AI generated. And it's not made by Porsche. The person, I should caveat, did hook Porsche into the video to say, if you want me to take this down, I'm happy to. Porsche decided not to. But it is mind-blowing. And you think, well, the opportunity for small businesses, the way that you can level the playing field using new technologies. We just say search was a huge level playing field for small businesses. I think we're going to see even more. It's going to become more complicated for regulators. It's going to become more complicated for platforms. But I do think we can do more in partnership.
So, Shelly, it's going to be even more complicated for general counsels, right? At least from the time that, when I went to law school, we didn't even have a computer. So to be able to guide your business on how to, look at policy, look at advertising, what's the role of the general counsel going to be in this, in future proofing policy for the next, say, 10 years?
Yeah, so I think till about a few years back, we were kind of monitoring, making sure that, there are no misleading claims, etc., right?
Right.
Now we have a huge new issue around privacy, right? And while the law is still taking shape, it's still at a very nascent stage in India, a lot of companies had to comply with GDPR a few years back, right? Now, digital advertising or digital marketeers actually collect a whole lot of data, and that's what consumer data, and that's where the problem starts, right? Because the law really requires you to have explicit consent, a transparent notice, which they might not comply with. And that's what could subject you to an enormous amount of fines, as we know, percentage of global turnovers, etc., and those, plus a huge reputational loss and loss of consumer trust. And, so going back to the point that I was making earlier, it's very critical that, the in-house legal counsels really work in tandem with the marketeers in the company and really educate them. And then you have, I think we've already touched about AI and the false narratives that it can generate, right? Or deep fakes, etc., right? Or fake testimonials, right? You have a whole lot of issues around that. So the importance is, one, to work really closely with marketeers, have processes, have your internal monitoring and compliance so that no SRO or statutory regulator could catch you. So just basically building a very robust internal framework.
Right. I think you've brought in the data protection law of India, where this whole piece of about consent, even for data that you've collected in the past, has come in, and I think that's the piece that you were referring to when you talked about consent. And yes, definitely, a lot of that goes into advertising, and if you now use any of that in advertising without taking proper consent, then there is a
and now you have consent withdrawal.
Yes.
So a consumer could. And then you have this whole issue around children,
yes,
right? Where you can't track behavioral patterns around, children. And, for an alcobev, it's like you have 18 and 21 in some states, which is considered to be the legal drinking age, right? So, there are just too many regulatory requirements, really making it very difficult for in-house legal teams to sort of navigate and making sure that we don't cross the line.
Okay, so I was made to sit here because then I can see the digital clock going down. And it clearly is. So I need to be conscious of time. But Shelly brought in the concept, the context of children, and today's digital native children have a completely different way of viewing the world. So starting with you, Michael, and then move to Guy from a self-regulatory perspective. What is the role that platforms like yours play in keeping the entire advertising piece, obviously the overall internet, but specifically advertising, safe for this digital native community, which oftentimes communicates with the entire world through these different platforms rather than through these modes of communication?
The role we play is key, it's pivotal, it is something we take incredibly seriously. We do believe we have a central role here. We understand the responsibility that we have as a platform, and I can't list the number of things we do to try and make sure that children and young people remain safe. I can go to a couple of things. First of all, Safe Search is a tool that is on by default that anyone we detect as being a young person. It means that you can't see any search results for any age inappropriate things. On YouTube, we have YouTube Kids. One of the challenges, I've got 2 young kids, they're glued to it, trying to get them off is a problem, and we'll come to that in a minute. YouTube Kids is a standalone app which is made for younger children. On YouTube proper, we've got community guidelines that we enforce. We also age gate ads for age inappropriate products like alcohol, like gambling, like tobacco. We have something called Family Link, which enables parents to monitor and control what their children are doing on their own devices. They can remove access to certain apps. They can limit screen time, to my point about YouTube Kids and my own kids. In advertising, we don't allow any programmatic advertising to anyone under the age of 18. I mentioned the fact that we age gate certain products and services. We don't allow location targeting to anyone under the age of 18 either. So, and we also, education, a huge amount of stuff that we're doing. Be Internet Awesome is something we just launched in Singapore with the Singaporean government to educate children there. We have versions of those initiatives. Internet Legends in Europe is one where we go out and try to educate children in schools or virtually. We work with industry initiatives in markets. I think there is a few called Media Smart, and I think it exists in Canada and in the UK and a few other places where we work with the industry to educate children and provide materials for parents. this is one of these things that it has to be a holistic approach, because it's way too complicated to say internet bad for children, climbing trees and playing football is good. We're way past that. This is trying to create an environment where children can thrive and learn and experience the brilliance of the online world whilst maintaining safety and giving parents control.
So, Guy, it says time's up, but
sorry,
we will. No, it's not yours. So, as a self-regulatory, body, what is the role that you see in being able to regulate the world of advertising, specifically from the point of view of digital native children whose behavior is very different from people from our generation, for example?
Yeah, I'm not sure the digital native bit makes as much difference as you might think, because, ad standards bodies have always prioritised protecting children, right? Whether pre-internet, now, we care about protecting children. So we've all got lots of rules that we administer and lots of work and activities that we undertake to try to make sure that they don't see content that's likely to cause harm, and to keep ads for age-inappropriate products away from them, age-inappropriate ads away from them. Mm-hmm. So, no targeting under 18s with alcohol ads, for example. And there are a bunch of other examples that we've all got in our own countries. So we're still, that still sits at the heart of what we all do, content rules and targeting rules.
Right. No, thank you very much, Shelly, Guy, Todd. Thank you very much for the time that you spent with us. We are really, really excited by the future of policy. And we are hoping that the self-regulatory organizations can continue to drive advertising regulation so that, various different governments don't come into this space more, because that makes it so much more difficult for organizations to run their advertising programs. We hope that, organizations like Google continue to play an important role in guiding the overall behavior of advertisers of, small, large, medium, of all sizes. And we, of course, hope that we have many more situations and sessions like this where we can learn from people like you. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot for your time.